So in any organization, whether it be a business, a sports team, or a nonprofit, whatever it may be, there's always kind of similar challenges, and the one that's the most common among all things is communication. Yeah, communication is always something that comes up, especially the more complicated the organization gets. In sports, it's being able to make sure that you communicate on the field and be able to talk off the field. All those things are really important. And what ends up happening is over time, if you don't really focus on this and work on this, it becomes more and more difficult and things start falling apart. Because when you first start a business, you've got kind of one person that's doing everything. So you've got one person that's selling it, one person that's servicing it, one person that's collecting the bills. Everything is done with one person. So there's only kind of one point of contact. Then that first employee that you hire, then you've got that second kind of ring. And so now you've got a couple additional points of contact. So you've got things that I do, things that you do, and things that we do. So now you have kind of 3 points of contact. And so it doesn't grow linearly, it grows kind of geometrically. And so this is still pretty manageable, because if I'm not doing it, that means you're doing it. And that still is pretty easy. But what ends up happening then is you add kind of a third element to it, and it starts to get a little more complicated, because now you've got things that I'm doing, things that you're doing, things that he or she's doing, then there's things that the two of us are doing, and there's the things that three of us are doing, and it starts getting more and more complicated. And so this even comes more into play when you add kind of a fourth component to it. And so what happens now is, and this line's not in the right place, so if it comes out here, is now you still have now you have even more of an intersection of craziness. So, when you go from when you have the 3 sections, it ends up being about 15 connections, and then it goes up to 80 once you add 4. And where this comes into play is, if you think about this being departments. And so if you've got, the account managers, you've got design, you've got development, and you've got content. Now if you look at it, you've got, at any one place, you've got 1 point of contact here. Here you've got 2 point of contact, so you've got your account manager and your content. Here you've got 3 points of contact, account manager, development, and content. Here you've got 2, 4, 3, 2, 2, 1. And this same pattern repeats on all of these. And so what ends up happening is, if in these situations where there's more than one person or 2 people or 3 people, what ends up happening is, if there's not specific people that are charged and in charge of specific things, this is where things kind of fall through the cracks. And so what can end up happening is, if you have 3 people of something that's in the intersection of all 3 of them here, if it doesn't specifically say, if you've got 1, 2, 3 people, if you don't specifically say, person 1, you take this thing, what ends up happening? Well, I thought you were going to do it. Well, I thought you were going to do it. This is why when they teach CPR class, they say, they don't just say, someone call 911, because then you fall into this kind of trap. It's, you call 911, and then you get that confirmation. And so the same thing happens, with MavenLink, with our project management software. This is why we say, do not ever assign 2 people to one task, right? So this is what ends up happening, is if you say both of you do it, then it comes back to that same quandary of, well, I thought you were going to do it. Well, I thought you were going to do it. And so what's important with communication is to make sure that if there's any of these gray areas, that you really focus as a group on communicating who owns what. And so this is really easy on big tasks, on big things, but it's the little things that typically are the ones that end up slipping through the cracks and not really getting to pay attention to. And it's also easy, the smaller you are, because you've got 1, 3, 15, and then it goes to 80. And imagine, we add a 5th department, add sales into this realm, add strategy as an overall, and so you start seeing that the potentiality of things falling through the crack starts skyrocketing. And so that's where communication becomes more and more important. And this is really why it's important to use, a project management software and use it wisely and use it in a way that assigns ownership. And like we always say, ownership doesn't mean you're doing it, but that means you're responsible for it. And so what can happen is in this situation, this is kind of, true to Andrew's wheelhouse. This is kind of, like an atom, with your electrons. So if you think about how electrons kind of rotate around the nucleus, the mental model that people give is kind of like orbiting a planet, but in reality it's more of like an electron field. So it could be anywhere inside of here, which is pretty relevant. But what ends up happening is at any one project, so if this is one project, as an account manager, you're rotating through this at all times. So it's really difficult to understand without taking a second to look at something where something falls, if it's a 2, a 3, or a 4. And so you have to kind of take a second to identify who could potentially be doing this, who could potentially have responsibility for it. And there's also different perspectives because that same task, account manager is going to look at it differently than a designer is going to look at it. And this is where it comes back to, you've got to be able to communicate what is in those gray areas and make sure that there's people who are assigned to it. Because what ends up happening is this is one project. And we're working on what? 25, 35 projects at a time, right? So times, call it 30. So not every project has all 4 departments working on it. So, some might, this might be times, times 10, this might be times 10, this might be times 5, type situation where there's certain numbers that are certain things. But if you start adding these numbers up, that's a huge amount of connection. So it's almost, it's not surprising that communication becomes a challenge at this point. It's almost more surprising that it's not more of a challenge when you start looking at all the potential intersections that things can fall through. So the big thing to trying to fix anything that is a potential opportunity for growth, in the Weberian theorem, looking for those growth opportunities, those pain points, is where are those soft spots and where can you focus on? And so communication is always going to be something that we can always get better at because of all of these different variables that are involved. And so what's key is to understand that this is opportunities for growth and not get frustrated by it, but be seeing it as an opportunity for, how can we identify, these different segments among the different departments, and what can we do to address them? Because it's really easy once you start segmenting what's a task within a project that's a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, then start assigning those things out. The revelation of how to segment things makes it a lot easier to organize it in your head and be able to kind of come across it. Because you've got, this times 30 plus us as a company, we have our own roles in those capacities and the things that we're doing, the things that we're growing. So you've got even more of those types of things. We're experimenting with new service lines and new product lines, so that adds a whole nother level of complexity because we don't even know where these intersections are. So just having a basic understanding of the fundamental building blocks of why communication becomes a challenge, and each time we add a department, why it gets not one department more difficult, but it grows geometrically and it's going to be more difficult. When you understand that that's the situation, then it makes it a little easier to deal with, and when these frustrations come, understand why they're coming. And so what can also end up happening here is the wider and the bigger this thing grows, so we want to make sure we're running a tight ship. We always focus on effective and efficient. I mean, if you think about it, the wider this thing gets, the bigger these areas get, and the more likelihood that things are going to fall through the cracks. So what we want to make sure is that we keep this thing confined and we keep it contained within an area that is manageable and approachable from the standpoint that we can attack it with our best practices and or add new best practices to address it.